Good afternoon. I'm Christopher Hart, the acting chairman of the National Transportation Safety Board. We have just completed our meeting on the crash last July of Asiana Airlines 214 in San Francisco. This was the first fatal commercial air carrier accident in the U.S. in almost 4.5 years, which means we have experienced an unprecedented period of safe operation without a fatal accident. Today's meeting is the culmination of an extensive investigation process that's designed to learn what happened to Asiana Flight 214 and why. Our role is to identify the safety lessons learned from the accident and to make recommendations to prevent it from happening again. In the investigation of this accident, we learned how important it is for pilots to understand and command their automation and not become over-reliant on it. The pilot must always be the boss. The pilot must always be in command. As a result, we made several recommendations about the interface between the crew and the automated systems, about the crew training on these systems, about addressing the complexity of the systems and the crew's ability to fly manually without those systems. We also learned about the kinds of injuries that occupants sustained in this crash and recommended further study to protect against those injuries. And we learned some important lessons from emergency response to this accident and made recommendations with the aim of improving the triage process and avoiding vehicle strikes. With that, I'd be happy to take a few questions. Please raise your hand, and when I call on you, provide your name and the name of your media outlet. Yes, please.
Thank you, Esther Zoe with China Central TV. So just to confirm that all of the 4 reasons or causes that the NTSB provided involve the Asiana company and the pilots. So can we understand this way that the crew, the flight crew, the airline company should take most responsibility? And also a follow-up question on that is the NTSB said that 2 of the fatalities can be avoided if those 2 victims have their safety belt on. What about the third one that was rolled over by the trucks? Is that fatality avoidable if the fire workers were performing their jobs under better guidance? Thank you.
Okay, that's a pretty excuse me, complicated question, but I'll try to repeat it. I think the essence of it was, did we put most of the blame, as I think you said, on the crew? And the second question was about how did the third passenger die? We do not assess liability or blame. What we do is we determine factually the links in the chain that resulted in the mishap. And I think our probable cause identifies that the links in the chain were many. It was the pilots, it was the automation, it was the intersection between the pilots and the automation, and their lack of understanding of the totality of what the automation did and did not do. In addition to that, we talk about the post-crash response, and we talk about all aspects of that. Now, to your question about the third person was properly belted, and our information was that the fatality came as a result of the door of the fore left door coming loose and striking that passenger. She died in the hospital several days later. She did not die on scene.
And I said the girl was rolled over by the trucks.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I misunderstood the question then.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry.
So
I'm having an audio problem when you bang on his desk.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I apologize.
So is that fatality avoidable if the fire trucks did not roll over this?
Okay, the question is about the woman who was struck by the rescue vehicle. We were obviously very concerned about the fact that she was struck by the rescue vehicle and have made recommendations regarding that. The problem was there were 2 things missing. There was not adequate guidance and there was not adequate training regarding how to respond to a scene like this. So if you imagine a mass casualty scene, in this case there were not a lot of people around on the scene, but there could have been. If you imagine that situation, the question is, do we fall back on our criminal training where we treat it as a criminal scene, which means don't move anything more than you have to, or do we treat it as a situation where we need to have access to the emergency vehicles, that they need to get close to the plane to be able to do what they have to do? So we should not put firefighters in the situation of having to make that decision without guidance and without training. So our recommendation goes to the guidance and training that is necessary to help them address situations like that to avoid vehicle strikes. Yes, please, in the back.
Stephen Stock with NBC Bay Area. A follow-up question to that, and then one more overall about automation, and that is, it is clear that she, the one who was run over, and the other lady were both out of their seats unseatbelted. Is that correct from your evidence?
The evidence is that they had no seatbelt. We could not say about out of their seat, but that certainly is the ultimate message of that is buckle your seatbelt. When the cabin crew says buckle your seatbelt, buckle your seatbelt. That's the #1 defense to protect you in the case of anything, turbulence, crash, you name it. Seatbelt is the #1 defense, and that's the big lesson from that.
I'm sorry. And the follow-up is on automation. NTSB and the FAA has been concerned about this interface between pilots and automation, over-reliance, the FLC, the flight level change mode trap. How do you address that in a more proactive way to make sure this never happens again?
The question is, how do we address the automation issues? The automation performed as designed. The question was, did the pilots understand how it was designed to perform? That's why we made the recommendations about not only the complexity of the automation, but also the training so that the pilots will understand what the automation will and will not do. Yes, please.
Hi, Robert McPherson from AFP. The words pilot error, I think, were missing from the probable cause, if I'm not correct. Of course, every headline writer is going to write pilot error instead. It seemed to me the key word in the rather wordy probable cause was mismanagement. Can you elaborate on that, and why are we not citing pilot error? Why are we talking about mismanagement?
We cited some things that the pilots did do that they shouldn't have done, some things that they didn't do that they should not have done. We did not call it pilot error because that moves into the realm of assessing liability and blame. We do not assess liability and blame. We merely identify the factual links in the chain that led to the mishap. Yes, please.
Matt Wald, New York Times. Mr. Hart, Boeing has just come out with a statement that says they reject the idea that their design of their flight control system contributed to this accident, a finding we do not believe is supported by the evidence. Could you recap why the board found that Boeing's design contributed here?
The question was, why did we find that Boeing's design contributed to this mishap? What we found was that, again, the automation performed as designed, but the pilots didn't fully understand what the automation would and would not do. So it was not a design issue by itself. It was the intersection between the design and the pilot's understanding of how the design worked. Yes, please.
Carolyn Pursuti with Voice of America TV. But yet, in your recommendations, you've made 2 recommendations to Boeing regarding that. And also, question for you: the 777 has been out since 1994, 20 years. Never had this problem before. I've spoken to many 777 pilots who are astonished at this, and they say this is like a cruise control on an automobile. It's a no-brainer. You always know when the auto throttles are engaged and when you go to the low altitudes, and they say this is known by all pilots.
The question is essentially, how do we have so many years of accident-free service? In fact, this is the first fatality in 777 service in almost 20 years. How do we have so many years of accident-free service and then this one? As the James Reason Swiss cheese model shows several lines of defense, and when there are holes in the defense, usually the holes don't line up, but if the holes line up, that's a problem. We had a lot of holes line up this time. We had a pilot who was new in this airplane. We had an instructor who was new as an instructor. We had fatigue. We had issues regarding understanding the automation. A lot of issues lined up the wrong way, as it turned out, to produce this result, because each one of those issues probably happens a lot by itself, innocuously, but, and in fact, if you removed any one of those links in the chain, this accident would not have happened. But this was the lineup of a series of unfortunate events, and that's what we're trying to do, is address each one of them separately. So there were no call-outs when there should have been call-outs, for example. They did not call out the change of the autopilot mode. They did not call out, we're at 500 feet, do we continue the approach or do we go around? The only way we can continue the approach at 500 feet is if it's stable. It was not stable, but that call-out didn't occur. We didn't get other call-outs that should have occurred. So there were lots of pieces, that links in this chain, that led to this event that do not undercut the safety of this airplane. It is a very safe airplane, it has a very strong safety record, but these events happened to line up in the way that made it through all the Swiss cheese.
Okay, one more question.
Yes, please.
The bottom line, the former chairman, who you now are acting in her place, said, you got to fly the airplane when you're the pilot. Is that the bottom line here? Ultimately, it is the pilot's responsibility.
And the question is the bottom line that is it the pilot's responsibility? The answer to that is yes. That's why we say the pilot must always be in command. The pilot must always be the boss. Thank you very much.